We've got some fresh new young talent doing some things that I know you haven't heard before.
1, 2, 3, listen.
Welcome to Finances, your home for all things financial, investment, money and lifestyle. Hosted and curated by the very talented team of certified financial planners, Burke, Britton Financial Partners. This is the Finances podcast, and my two guests today, Jasmine O'Brien and Katherine Dennis, principals at Sladen Legal's employment law team. Have I got that right?
That's right. So Sladen Legal, we're the Melbourne-based arm of Harwood Andrews, and thank you so much for having us on today.
No, it's a pleasure. Thanks for taking the trip down the road. Your back looked a little bit sore, Katherine, when you got out of the car. It's a big drive all the way down here to Geelong.
I just did a few twists. Now I'm ready to go.
Now, we're just talking about our relationship. So the Harwood Andrews have been a Geelong kind of institution for, I don't know, how many years? Have you got any idea how long Harwood Andrews has been around for in Geelong?
I do, because the week I started, they hit 175 years.
Oh, wow.
And we're now 6 years later. So I think we would have just had our 180th birthday.
Wow. And so maybe this is a bit of a history that I'm not aware of, and this is a question without notice. When did the partnership or the aggregation with Sladen Legal actually happen?
So Sladen Legal as an entity started up in 2013. So we're still very much part of Harwood Andrews. It's one firm, but our Melbourne office is branded as Sladen, just to differentiate ourselves outside of the Geelong market. So that's been a very successful move. And
sorry, how long ago was that, did you say?
2013.
Okay, so that aligns pretty closely to exactly when the two of you joined. Is that right? Is it 10 years at Sladen, or have I got that totally wrong?
So 10 years for Sladen Legal for its creation, but Jazz and I have worked together at a previous firm. So I'd say our professional relationship has spanned 10 years. We've both been at Sladen Legal for six.
So that's right.
Yep.
So we go back, I think, to the start of 2013 when I joined an employer lobby group, Australian Industry Group. Yep. And met Katherine, and Katherine was doing a great job, and we started to work very closely together, and here we are 10 plus years later.
Now, we're going to talk employment law. I know everyone's excited to hear about employment law today, but the way our podcast normally rolls is we like to get a little bit of the backstory of our guests. So let's go as far back as you'd like to go in terms of where you both grew up, where you went to school, and how you eventually found your way into employment law and Sladen Legal. Maybe, Katherine, I might start with you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up in Melbourne, went to high school in Ivanhoe, so I went to Ivanhoe Girls. My family then moved to Albury-Wodonga actually for a couple of years. So I did my HSC at year 11 and 12 at Scott's up in Albury.
That's HSC because it's in New South Wales.
That's right. So HSC, not VCE. I then came back down to Melbourne for uni and moved back down, did my law arts degree, worked pretty much throughout the entire studies. And then I joined AI Group, as Jazz mentioned, the employer association, finished my legal training to become a practicing solicitor and was there for over 5 years, and then made my way to Sladen Legal.
So that was a lightning run through your history. Can I go back just to your high school days?
Sure.
Where was the interest in law?
Yeah.
Like, was that something that came from your family, or was there an influence that actually led you down that path, or did you have zero idea what you wanted to do when you left school?
Yeah, look, a lot of my family are in the legal profession. So I always had an interest in law. I studied it in year 11 and 12 and did quite well. I was always interested in it. However, I initially started off in journalism. I thought I would probably be better placed there.
Okay.
Got into a couple of years in that degree and realised it wasn't for me, so I transferred into law.
What was it about journalism? So the course, not a role? You actually,
correct,
okay.
Yeah. So studying, look, I just probably realised it wasn't what I thought it would be for me.
What did you think journalism was going to look like?
Look, I was 18, 19, so a baby. But I don't know, it just wasn't really what I thought it would be. Not that, you wanted to be an anchor or anything like that. I loved writing. I was always quite good at writing. I don't know, it was probably not aligned to where I wanted to go as well. And so I always was really interested in the law and humanities and things like that. And social justice was a big piece for me as well. So I think perhaps my personality and me maturing as a person, those things aligned better to law and what you could get out of studying law. Obviously, I've been practicing for a long time now, but I think the opportunities that you have from studying law, there's many there, and they aligned with what I probably wanted to do personally.
Was there a push given that you had family members in the legal
a
world?
A little bit. Look, they are in a different area, family, criminal law, but I also always loved working with people. I loved politics, still do. And there's that political bent to employment law. It's much more fluid. There's a huge social influence to the laws, which really aligned with what I was passionate about and still am. So I think the fit of employment law very much suits my personality and the areas that I find really interesting.
Do you have siblings?
2 brothers.
Yep. Did they end up in law as well?
No.
What do they do with themselves?
One's in actually property management and one is an electrician.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
Yep.
All right. Well, that probably brings you up to date with where we are today.
Yes.
Jasmine, let's go back as far as you'd like to go.
It's fascinating because the first time I've learned that about Katherine today, but remarkably similar in that I went through high school wanting to be a journalist as well.
Really?
And born and bred in Melbourne, went to school in Melbourne, graduated Year 12 in 2001. And through the whole of that time, I thought, I'm going to be a journalist.
Yep.
And was really set on that. And at that time, the RMIT journalism course was the course to do. And I probably surprised myself in Year 12 in a good way. Mm. And I thought, hang on a minute, I could do law here.
So same question for you. Where was the journalism influence? Did you want to be an anchor? Did you have a passion for writing?
Loved writing, and I still do. And we often talk about how your writing changes. And back at high school, your writing was so floral and so creative and so poetic. And now as a lawyer, it's just so clinical. There's not a wasted word. But I got into law and media and communications at Melbourne Uni, and I started that and I thought, well, I'm just doing law because I've got the marks, it'd be silly not to do it. But it gradually took over. I sort of made a great group of friends in our media comm law stream, but law sort of ended up taking up most of the time, and you sort of hung out at that law building at law school instead of going up to the main Melbourne Uni campus. And you get 3 years in and you think, well, be silly not to finish it. Be silly not to get qualified. And lo and behold, that just sort of took over. And with the benefit of hindsight, I'm pleased it worked out that way.
Yeah. So, was there family members in your greater circle that were in the legal industry or not?
No, not at all. So Dad's in construction, had a construction business, and we sort of grew up very much with that business mentality and having that sort of entrepreneurial spirit sort of drilled into us. But my sister is a lawyer, a barrister up in Sydney. But yeah, no lawyers in the family prior to that, at least that I'm aware of.
So when did you graduate? Well, I don't want to age you too quickly, but when did you graduate?
Look, I graduated from uni in 2007 and started full-time work at Clayton Youths in 2008. So I will show my age, I did what was then called articles instead of a graduate year, where you rotate through different parts of the firm. And I went to litigation. I thought, I'm going to be a litigator. I'm going to love this. Didn't enjoy it and fell into workplace relations.
Is the ideal around litigation sort of the Hollywood depiction of litigation, or is that why there's a tendency? Because most of the legal professionals I speak to, they all talk about litigation being sort of the optimum or the ideal, and when they get in there, they realise, actually, I've got to find another niche.
Well, that's it, because growing up, the TV show, and I was heavily influenced, I think, by the TV shows, was Ally McBeal.
Oh, of course, yeah.
And that
great soundtrack too.
Oh, I still pump the soundtrack.
Yeah, I do too. It's great.
It's just, I saw that and I thought, I want that. I want great colleagues. I want the excitement. I want the drama. But you then realise that the reality is very, very different to that. But fell into workplace relations and 15 years later, here I am.
So when you say you fell into workplace relations, how did you actually make that? So you did your articles, you thought litigation, but how did you actually find your way in there? Were you given an opportunity, or it was just coincidence, or
massive coincidence? So each rotation, you had to nominate down your preferences, but there was no guarantee with 21 other grads that you'd get your preference. So workplace relations was last. So I thought, I've well and truly been shafted here. I've been given my last preference. I never studied at uni. But 2 weeks in, I just knew I loved it, and I knew that was what I was going to do.
So what did you love about it?
Well, I think it was an exciting time. It was new laws, and it was a very dynamic time. The GFC was in full swing, and it taught you not to take anything for granted. It was a new team. It was a new boss. It was very exciting. But it felt very relatable.
So this is still at Clayton Utes?
Yeah, this is still at Clayton Utes. It felt very relatable. I understood the concepts. I'd be a hopeless tax lawyer. I'd be a hopeless many other thing lawyer because I don't intrinsically understand the concepts. But workplace relations, I just seem to understand.
Yeah. So Clayton Utes until when?
Clayton Utes until early 2013. And it was just time for a change. I'd been there for 5 years. I'd worked up in Brisbane, worked most of that time in Melbourne. And I really wanted to sort of get my hands dirty a bit more. And when I worked up in Brisbane, I had a friend who had worked at AI Group and spoke really highly of it and some of the matters that she'd got involved in. And funnily enough, they came knocking at my door in late 2012, and I went over there at the start of 2013, and we spent 5 great years there.
So did you know each other before AI Group?
No. I started a bit earlier than Jazz at AI Group, finishing off my studies. But yeah, couldn't speak highly enough of AI Group. Great experiences, great practical training, which really anchored me for my career. And I know we have these discussions quite frequently. You know, the experiences that we have had, we've taken throughout into now.
Well, that's it. And so I came in there as like a senior associate type role, and we were paired up with one of the emerging lawyers to train and mentor them. And I think we cooked the books slightly just to make sure we got each other, because we recognised, I think, a kindred spirit. But one thing that touched me deeply is I think 3 weeks in, Katherine asked me to move her admission.
Yep.
So I've still got those photos of us at the Supreme Court back in 2013.
So for the uninitiated, can you tell me what that means?
Yeah, so it's basically a very formal day where you go to court. It's a ceremony, and you have to stand up and swear to be true and faithful, essentially. But what you need someone who is already a lawyer to get up and say to the judges, I think Katherine Dennis is a fit and proper and excellent person, and she should be part of the legal profession.
Do you get to nominate who does that for you, Katherine? Yep.
Yeah, so Jazz moved me, and I think, it was pretty early on. I'm not sure if it was 3 weeks, but it was pretty early on.
Sounds good anyway.
We'll add it for some comic effect. But yeah, early on, we had a really great rapport and connection, and we did a lot of work together. So yeah, once I was admitted, I, as a junior, assisted Jasmine with a lot of her matters. Now,
Jazz, you left to go elsewhere, so you left to be part of the Sladen team, is that right, in inception? And you, Katherine, stayed at AI Group, is that right?
No, so soon after I went across to Sladen Legal, there was
it was the other way around.
Yeah, there was an opportunity there for me. So, and look, similarly, I had been at AI Group for over 6 years. It was time for me to see what else was out there.
Did you feel that separation, Jasmine? Was it hard to see her go?
Well, it wasn't a separation for very long, but I had the opportunity to build a team from scratch, and which was really exciting, and the opportunity really energised me. And having Katherine as a part of that team was always a no-brainer.
Yeah. So how did you get across to Sladen? Did Katherine put a good word in for you, or how did it work?
Well, I was approached, I think, by a recruiter who I think had been given the task to go and find someone, and that was essentially what I said. Well, this is going to be a great opportunity, and I'm really excited about it, but I do want to build my own team. And they said, great, you'll have that opportunity, and who better to anchor the team with than Katherine?
Sorry, I must have misinterpreted that. Who got to Sladen first?
I did.
You did? Okay, sorry.
Yeah, that's okay. Yeah, no. So yeah, the opportunity arose, and I thought it was a great opportunity for me, so I couldn't say no. Okay.
So this team is building a team which was specifically in employment law. How do you go about building a team from scratch? And that's probably a second question to that is, let's talk basics about what employment law actually covers off on?
Well, employment law is basically anything to do with the workplace relationship. So we're pretty much cradle to grave in terms of the services that we provide to clients. So onboarding and recruitment through to termination and enforcement of post-employment restraints. But essentially any dispute or issue, good or bad, that a business might have with its staff is pretty much our bread and butter. So whether it be your unfair dismissals, your industrial disputes, enterprise agreement negotiation, workplace bullying, sexual harassment.
What's the example of a good dispute?
Well, a good dispute. Well, you've caught me on the hop there.
Good for who?
Well, yeah, I guess it depends who you're representing. Look, it could be a compliance piece with an enterprise bargaining agreement. I know probably more so at AI Group, we had a lot of work in the Fair Work Commission, and there would be a lot of disputes with regards to the interpretation and implementation of enterprise agreements. So there might be a matter where we're assisting a client in regards to an interpretive issue and how they are supposed to implement a provision of the EA. And that dispute may transpire into something that's positive because it gives parties clarity about how a term's supposed to be applied, whether that's to do with pay, terms and conditions, shift arrangements, rostering arrangements and the like. So I think something like that's probably a positive thing because it's providing the parties that clarity that everybody needs. But mainly the disputes that we deal with I would say the disputation is either side they're in dispute about something, whether it's the lawfulness of a dismissal, whether they're saying that they were discriminated against for whatever reason. It might even be at the front end. They're saying that they didn't get a job because of a prohibited reason. So Jazz is spot on in that we work from a 0 to 10, the full spectrum of the employment relationship, and you become very aware and you know your clients' businesses and what they need and what their overarching objectives are, so you can then assist them in achieving those objectives, which is obviously pretty important.
Yeah, I think we're talking just off air around sort of ongoing relationships and how sometimes probably specifically the legal industry in particular areas can be quite transactional, and I suppose just the importance of being able to develop an ongoing relationship with your clients. And something that we as financial advisors and at Burke Britton value greatly. How do you see those ongoing relationships forming the basis for the quality of the advice that you provide and the counsel that you provide?
Well, as you say, it is so important because those quality and ongoing relationships are self-perpetuating. So the more you get in there, the more you know, and the more, I guess, you've got that advantage of incumbency, where you become very hard to dislodge. Because are you going to go to the person who you've dealt with for 10 years and is doing a good job and knows your business inside out? Or are you going to go to someone new where you have to explain those fundamental building blocks? Like we love
100%.
Getting to know businesses. Our ideal client is someone who we can build that relationship with.
Absolutely.
Whether they've got 10 employees or 10,000.
I think Jazz and I we're very much aligned on understanding a client's business and what drives them and what their overarching objectives are, but also their infrastructure, what they have, what they need to do, their labour costs and overheads and things like that, because they all inform the advice that we provide. Anyone can provide advice around Section X of the Fair Work Act requires you to do A, B and C, but it's about the implementation and how you do that in a meaningful and pragmatic way. So I'd say we're very solution orientated in our advice and very focused on, the answer has to fit what the client wants, provided it's legal,
totally.
Obviously.
And I couldn't agree more, because I think what we pride ourselves is that real business partnering.
Yep.
Now, it's never our decision. When you're advising, ultimately you're advising, not deciding. But one of the things we talk about a lot is, I'm not a fan of this, here are the 3 options, you go and pick one.
Yep.
I think it's really respectful to a client to say, knowing what I know about your business, knowing what I know about your objectives and knowing what I know about the law, if I were you, this is what I'd pick, knowing what I know. I do think you have to do that. The other thing I do really enjoy about the clients that we work with, and maybe this is a bit heretical for a lawyer to say, obviously taking Katherine's point on board, we have to ultimately comply with the law. But I think we do have a healthy appetite for risk. Now, I want to demarcate between risk and stupidity. Like stupidity is diving off a cliff face first without a protective mechanism. But risk is saying to someone, well, hang on, if this goes wrong, then here are the likely consequences and this is what we can patch up. If that goes wrong, there's our fail-safe mechanism. I think sometimes lawyers are perhaps too led by the conservative option instead of perhaps the business partnering option. Now, you've got to be legal, I get that. But a 10% risk when you speak to an executive, when you speak to an owner, they'll carry that because what's often your biggest cost? Employees. You don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. You can never give someone a fail-safe solution.
Yeah. Thinking about how clients come to you, so thinking about how you're able to build a relationship and you have those very sort of pragmatic and solution-oriented conversations with clients and businesses and owners that you have great relationships with, but how do people ultimately find their way to you in the first place? Like, how are you seeing the bulk of your clientele come to you? Is it coming to you with disputes? Is it recognizing that they need to have some in-house or contracted counsel for your services? How do people actually find their way to you?
There's probably two main ways that we get a new client, and one is an employee at an old client leaving and going to a new company and saying, I want to use Sladen.
Is it normally HR or CFO or something like that?
Spot on. So that key person, and whenever we've got a strong in it one client, it can be exciting when we have someone go somewhere new because it's a great opportunity to expand. And probably the other key one is word of mouth referrals. I used Sladen, they were great. They're probably the two main ways we get new clients. Our existing clients, they've been built up through a range of ways.
Again, we were talking just off air about, from a financial planning perspective, there's a multitude of, like, holistic's a little jargonistic when we talk about any area of advice, but when we think about an individual client, there are so many needs present with a client, and if you're aware of those needs and you're good at introducing relationships, there is a great opportunity via word of mouth to say, here's Katherine and Jasmine, they're fantastic at what they do. And it's one of the things we've been very focused on as a business is making sure that we are fantastic connectors of other professionals and are not afraid to introduce someone or a concept or an avenue of thought that's maybe different to what our clients have thought about in the past. And I've thought about this even from a small business owner perspective myself, that, I mean, as Peter and I have grown this business over the last 2 decades, like, employment law wasn't the forefront of our thinking. Like, there's been, as the business has evolved, that we've begun to think, I suppose, about the need and also see the value, because that's probably the kicker for a lot of small businesses is, like, where is the value in actually engaging and having a cost to receive this advice. And I like what you said it a couple of times already, but that pragmatic, solution-orientated and appetite for risk, that sort of came across when you did a little presentation for us and the team on workplace bullying and harassment, which I think we spoke about. The team, to be honest, weren't rapt about doing that 2 hours until we completed that 2 hours, and every one of them felt as though that had a new perspective and had actually received some great value from that time. So again, as a small business owner, I suppose it's important to think outside of the box in terms of what is actually going to add value for them in their growing business.
Yeah, and that was a great day. And I'm always conscious walking into those sessions that I might have an audience under sufferance. But I think one of the ways you do create value is really sharing the cases, the weird and the wonderful, that we've been involved in. I think we talked through all the protected attributes and we had stories under each of them. I guess one of the ways that we can create value, well, at the outset, it's getting your contracts and policies right. But at the back end, it's, if I can put it in crass terms, avoiding a $5,000 dispute turning into a $50,000 dispute by getting advice quickly when you're exiting somebody, when you're managing a post-employment claim, when you're thinking of getting rid of someone, when you get a bullying complaint, when you get a sexual harassment complaint. One of the things that I do acknowledge is that we are a cost centre, and workplace relations is often a cost centre for businesses, you're typically throwing good money after bad to solve a problem that you've got. But one of the best ways we can assist is limiting the scope of the problem.
The problems that we talk about, there's been a unique sense or unique change in workplace operations, relations and location over the course of the last 3 years with COVID. Maybe, Katherine, if you want to talk to what sort of impact that has had on businesses and how they think about their employment arrangements.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I guess just to kick off, Jazz and I have had many discussions on this particular issue with regards to flexible working arrangements and the desire that we see for those flexibilities to continue. We are hearing a lot from our clients that employees who have worked from home during the pandemic are wanting to kind of continue those flexibilities because they're now used to that. And we're getting the question of, what can I do? I need the employees back in the office, or at least for, X number of days. What can I do to do that? So it is a really current issue. And just to top it off, there's obviously been legislative changes to the Fair Work Act with regards to those flexibilities increasing and broadening. So we might talk about that in a bit more detail. But I guess for the most part, what we would be advising our clients is that, look, first and foremost, if they can work from home flexibly and the employees are still being productive, it's important to look at, well, can that actually continue? And if it can't, why not? We hear this, well, I just want them back just because. So it's really about unpacking, well, what's the real issue here? Is it because, there's a cultural decline in engagement between employees? We don't have that anymore. Is it because, you want to mandate one day in the office so you can have catch-ups with people, team meetings or whatever? I think it's about really looking at the utility of why are you wanting to mandate returns to the workplace, because it won't suit every industry and it won't suit every workplace. Some industries working from home, in itself is just not viable. But obviously I'm referring to working from home. Flexible working might be changing your hours, working from home remotely sometimes and coming into the office. So it's a very broad thing. But I guess what we are seeing in addition to that is, I suppose, the change in expectations to some employees. Maybe starting off in certain industries that the expectation is that they work from home, or at least more so than in the office. And that's a very interesting issue to manage. I always say, and Jazz and I have had this discussion, it's really critical that you're clear around expectations from the get-go. If it's wishy-washy, it's never going to end well.
Yeah. And I think those observations are fantastic, and in many ways has answered the question that I get commonly, which is, well, how do I get staff back in the office? Now, well, you tell them is the blunt answer, but what Katherine's really answered is the question that they're really asking, which is, how do I get staff back in the office without wielding the big stick? And there's an assumption there, well, is that the right thing for us to do? We had one matter talking about expectations where someone in their first week said, look, I'm finding it a bit challenging to be in the office from 8:30 to 5:30. And the client said, well, let me solve that problem for you.
See ya.
So, you do need to be mindful about not overplaying your hand. But I think the key thing is that there is no one size fits all. Like in the legal industry, there's a very clear metric, isn't there? So you're very quickly going to be able to identify if someone's not performing from home. But even accepting that productivity is there and productivity can be managed remotely, you really start to get into a discussion about what sort of environment do you want. I admit,
I think culture's a big one as well.
I love coming to the office and seeing my colleagues. I love the camaraderie that we have and the discussions. I don't think we need that 5 days a week, but at the same time, I would want to very much maintain that. I think it's just such a core component of a workplace that I like. Now, someone could come to me and during an interview process and say, Jasmine, I want to do 4 days from home. And I'd say, well, this isn't the environment for you. Now, they're going to go and get that somewhere else. I have no doubt. It's not me taking an ideological viewpoint. It's just about what sort of environment and culture do I want to be part of.
So assuming that someone comes to you at the cradle sense of putting together an employment arrangement or hiring a team, what are the things practically that they need to do to make sure that the expectations are set and that the parameters are clear? Is it conversations alone? Is it
you have touched on one of our key bugbears, which is, and to segue from Katherine as something Katherine touched on before, one trend that we've really seen over the last 10 years is probably a greater reluctance or a reduction in capability for business leaders to have those robust and respectful conversations.
Yep.
You've given me the easy answer. Obviously, we tell them and we share those clear expectations. But, Katherine, I know we see often people are unwilling to have those discussions.
Definitely. I think at times there's no appetite to have those transparent and fair, robust professional discussions around expectations.
Even at the beginning of an arrangement?
I think it depends on who we're referring to in the business. It may not be something that they want to have at the front end because they don't want it to be aggressive or come across in a negative way, when it's actually not negative. It's actually, provided it's, communicated effectively and reasonably, it's actually important and critical that it's done at the front end, because you're laying the foundation as to what's expected, the KPIs or the performance requirements, and you're being quite clear from the front end what is, acceptable, what's not acceptable. Now, obviously, the caveat is that throughout the employment relationship, employees in certain categories can come to you and say, look, I have caring responsibilities, I have a disability, I need some flexibility with my work. Now, obviously, as Jas mentioned, those things need to be managed on a case-by-case basis and determined accordingly. But for the most part, from the front end, I think having those discussions in a fair and transparent and professional way is critically important.
And you can do it in a way that's not confrontational. One of my favourite questions to ask during a job interview is, what will you need from me to be successful in this role? And, people who've come in with prepared answers and are giving you what you want to hear. It forces them to go off script. And that's where you hear, well, I need to be able to pick up my kids. I do want to have an honest conversation about whether this role is available part-time. I participate in this activity outside of work, which means I need to be certain places at certain times that might intrude on work hours. And that's where I think you get the ability to make a judgment call in a lawful way about whether or not the relationship's likely to work.
Do you think that appetite to have those discussions is getting better or worse?
Well, I think it's getting worse because everyone's so scared about having to call us.
Even though we don't bite.
Yeah.
Well, it's actually, from a business point of view, I know one of the things that Amy, our practice manager, has valued is the ability to be able to have some conversations, and none of them have been earth-shattering, but just to be able to have that counsel and that conversation is highly valuable. But I think you're right. There is a sense that someone's going to put their foot in it, as an employer, that you're very much bound by saying the right thing. But I think that can, as we said, can lead to the negative of not having guidelines.
I also think it helps, though, because if in the absence of a discussion, people make their own ideas as to what's expected and what's acceptable. Now, if you don't have those discussions from the front end, you can't then say, well, that's not actually acceptable. We had this discussion. Well, no, actually you didn't. How else is the employee supposed to know what's appropriate and what's acceptable and what's not? So it's obviously, it has to be communicated in an appropriate and professional way, but I think it's critical from the front end. Otherwise, there is that ambiguity as to what they can do and whether the employee perhaps pushes the boundaries more than what the business perhaps will accept.
And to run with that, Katherine reminded me of one of my sort of favourite sayings, which is employee perception is reality.
Yeah.
And that sounds basic, but you see it through disputes, through bullying, through claims, through allegations. Most people consider themselves a pretty reliable narrator in their own lives and a pretty reliable narrator around what's going on in the workplace. And that's because their perception is reality. You can never really say that someone's perception is wrong. You can just say it's crazy.
Yeah.
But if you don't sort of fill in the gaps for someone, then they're sort of free to fill in the gaps themselves. And
so the balance between the robust discussion, you mentioned earlier, I think we're off air again, where you said that an employment contract or a contract is essentially something that you want to be sat in the bottom drawer and not really have to pull out. But to what degree in that infancy stage of an employment arrangement, are we balancing the conversation with a new employee and having it documented? Where does the crossover exist?
Yeah, so to use the new employee situation, you've got a 6-month period, 12 months if you've got fewer than 15 employees, to be able to terminate them without being exposed to an unfair dismissal claim. You can be exposed to effectively an unlawful termination claim, which is instead of having terminated them for poor performance, you've terminated them because they're pregnant, because they're a particular religion, because of a particular ethnicity. The answer to that question is you've just got to have enough to be able to document that you didn't terminate them for an unlawful reason. One of our favourite questions when someone comes to us and said, oh, we've got this person, they're in their probation, we want to get rid of them. What's their story going to be? And it's a little bit of an unfair question because we're asking businesses to speculate, but it would surprise you how readily able that MD or that CEO or that HRD is able to come back and say, this is what they'll say.
Yeah.
And so our response, well, how do we defeat that? How do we respond to that? But one of the recent ones that we had talking about not letting people fill in gaps and those robust and respectful conversations. I had a client call me and they said, oh, Jasmine, look, just don't tell me that we're horrible people, but I just need to share something with you. I said, okay. They said, look, we just did a round of job interviews and we had someone come in a wheelchair and we weren't expecting it. We didn't have the heads up, and I really hope we didn't sort of betray our thought out of respect to the person who came in for the job. We're just wondering how we handle this. Is our radar's going up? And I said, oh, look, are they the best person for the role? And the client said, no, we've got one better, but they'd be second. I said, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to have a second round of interviews and you're going to bring them back and you're going to engage with the elephant in the room and you're going to say, look, I see you're in a wheelchair. What would we need to know? What would we need to do to make this workplace work for you? And they'll have that question. And when we go and hire the other person, because they're the better candidate, we'll be able to readily respond to that person's potential perception that they weren't hired because of their disability. So engaging with the elephant in the room often puts you in a stronger position as an employer to respond to those sorts of claims.
Yeah, having the conversation early.
Exactly.
Yeah. Talking about some of one of the things I particularly enjoyed in the presentation you did for the team was some of those real world scenarios. Do you have, we won't go too deep in multiple stories, but you had a couple of crackers. Is there some other workplace stories that you might want to share with us that have presented a good opportunity to share with other teams?
You've put me on the spot now. I know Katherine will have a few, but one of my favourites, this is about 10 years ago, occurred. I was acting for an abattoir and 2 women got involved in a private fist fight at a private function.
As you do.
And the subordinate knocked the boss out after the boss said something disparaging about that person's family. And me, about 10 years ago, perhaps wildly overestimating my mediation abilities, I went off to this abattoir to mediate unsuccessfully between these 2 women to see if a functional working relationship could be restored. And I don't know if I can say this, but I will. But,
we can delete it if you don't want.
Privately, I referred to it as my BBC matter, bitches be crazy. But that one certainly stuck around. But what I take from that story is that, and one of the things that we do get involved in, is there'll be things that happen outside the workplace that aren't related to the workplace. So just as a quick little detour, some of the things you can do outside the workplace can impact your work. Like if one of your staff is wearing a Burke Britton polo and, is sort of caught up in, they bash someone or they yell at a little old lady down the street, they're outside of work, but it's got the potential to impact your reputation.
So that makes me think a little bit about social media and the influence that social media can have and brand damage when it comes to employees in their own time, on their own social media. To what degree?
Oh, we had one just recently. There was a news article that came up on Facebook, a really unfortunate incident where I can't remember who, I was either a group of Muslims or a group of Sudanese had been subject to some fairly horrible treatment. An employee at a client of ours wrote something fairly disparaging in the comments of that news article that people understandably took umbrage to. So what they did is they clicked on his Facebook profile that listed his employer, and in the morning we had about 10 or 15 screenshots from aggrieved members of the public saying, this is what your bloke is saying about this situation, and they were promptly sacked. So social media does have the potential to cause huge brand damage.
We've had a lot recently, unfortunately, where employees have used their personal, whether it's Facebook account or Instagram account, making, as Jasmine's mentioned already, whether it's disparaging or completely inappropriate comments, but they've been identified as an employee of X business, and it's quite apparent that that's the case. And, in some of those instances, their employment has been terminated because it's just employment relationship has become untenable as a consequence of their conduct. And, I
suppose the question is that it is lawful to terminate someone who damages your brand via their own social media.
Spot on.
Absolutely. And that's why I was, my next point always is, do you have a social media policy? Do we have guidelines as to what, and, we always joke, you shouldn't need guidelines to make someone realise that putting up X is not appropriate. Nothing surprises me anymore when I get calls, they've done wash, they've posted wash. But we always say, have your social media policy, have your code of conduct policy there. Make sure you have the induction done at the front end of the employment relationship commencing, because, when you do have something like this come up, you've got very clear guidelines and parameters as to what's acceptable and what's appropriate, and you can pull the trigger in those circumstances.
I'm interested thinking about our own business and our want. Amy's, as our practice manager, is encouraging of our advisors, particularly of being present on social media and endorsing our brand and creating referral and engagement relationships via LinkedIn and Facebook and the like.
It's a great tool. Used correctly, it's very effective and efficient and a great medium. But it's just about making sure employees appreciate that, whatever they put out there is there. It's not deleted.
That's it. And even us, and we should obviously practice what we preach, but we've branched out from your traditional LinkedIn recently, and Katherine started up our own Instagram account.
You've got your own sort of podcast on Instagram.
Safe to say, there's nothing disparaging. We haven't posted anything disparaging or political in any capacity on that.
Let's give that a shout out. So what's your Instagram channel called, and what are you talking about?
Two Lawyers Talk, Jazz and I. It's a weekly video that we do. Look, I jokingly say it's mainly for our wardrobe, but it's topical issues that are in the media or matters that we're currently dealing with, and we have a bit of a chat about that.
What day does it come out?
Usually
on a Tuesday.
Do you record it on a Tuesday?
We record it on a Monday.
Record it on a Monday for Tuesday.
Okay.
So it's a number 2 Lawyers Talk.
Yeah.
Okay, great. We'll pop that in the show notes for sure. Now, would you believe we've been talking for nearly an hour?
Really?
Yes.
Very easy to talk about yourself, isn't it?
We do love a chat, Jazz.
Let's go back to talking about the Two Lawyers Talk Instagram. How can people find you? So how can people find you on the interwebs? Where can they look? On LinkedIn or the website? How can they get in touch with you?
Well, sladen.com.au is probably the easiest way. Both Katherine and my profiles are up on that website. Our contact numbers are there. We're both actively on LinkedIn. There's Two Lawyers Talk. I don't know if I should say our phone numbers and our emails while we're on this, but I think the best way is just to Google us or go to the Sladen Legal website.
Yep.
Is the easiest way to find us.
Yep, I'll make sure I pop that in the show notes. So before we wrap up, is there anything else in closing that you'd like to say, or any other closing call to action to the HR department or a CFO or a small business that is maybe thinking about being proactive before there's an issue with things in their employment arrangements?
Yeah, I think I always say to a lot of my clients, there's no issue until there's an issue. And I think that's a really good way to look at it, because it's always good until it's not good. So I think being proactive is critically important. I think it's really important to have the infrastructure there from the get-go. So it also empowers you, your HR, your management team, senior management team, to actually have conviction in their decisions and actually implement them appropriately and actually stand behind their decisions. And when you have the infrastructure in place, it gives you the confidence to make those decisions and actually stand behind them. So that's what I would say. Be proactive, implement those infrastructures and then have the confidence to actually do what you want to do, subject to it being legal and fair, obviously, but have the confidence to do those things.
Can you tell that we've been working together for over 10 years?
I can. Did you want to add anything to that, Jazz?
No, I think it's something that we often talk about and reflect on. I think we talked at the outset about Katherine and I meeting, and 10 years later, we're now very much peers. And
we do talk about other things other than employment law, I should clarify that.
But that's been an incredible journey for us both to go on. But, you know, despite that relationship and despite that closeness, we need to still regularly have our robust discussions. And a good, strong working relationship doesn't mean that you don't regularly disagree or regularly challenge each other. One of the things I probably say quite frequently is, Katherine, I've sort of reflected on what you say and I think you're right. You know, I love that. I love having that around me, and I think it's a real testament to the benefits that come from long and sustainable workplace relationships.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, from a Burke Britton perspective, I would like to say thank you very much for the relationship that we've had over the last few years. I know it's been insightful, it's been an education, and we're grateful for having you both on the podcast today and for all the support you've provided us up until now. Jasmine, Katherine, thank you so much for joining us, and I look forward to maybe round 2 or round 3 in the near future.
Oh, well, I'd love that.
Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much.
Bye-bye.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you're keen to understand more about how financial advice could benefit you, follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at Burke Britton FP, or Google Burke Britton Financial Partners. Check out our client reviews, testimonials, and make a time to meet one of our certified financial planners by clicking Book Now on our website. Thanks for listening.
Any information contained in this podcast is of a general nature only. No account was taken as to the objectives, financial situation, or needs of any particular person. Therefore, before making any decision, listeners should consider the appropriateness of any information with regard to their particular objective, financial situation, needs, and seek independent advice from a licensed professional specific to their circumstances.
All right, hit it.
That translates to, don't be a moron and act on what some random person says on a podcast. Take personal responsibility, do your homework, ask questions, and speak to an actual human that knows what they're talking about before you do anything. PB Financial Solutions Proprietary Limited, trading as Burke Britton Financial Partners, are authorised representatives of AMP Financial Planning Limited, AFS, licence number 232706.